I never expected to be cornered like that. Not by someone who shared handshakes with me in front of the board. But when Vice President Darren leaned forward, eyes full of venom, and said, "Either accept a demotion, or we'll terminate your contract," I realized exactly how far envy can go in a man with power. It was the night before the biggest negotiation of my career, one that would lock in a multi-million-dollar deal with a major South African supplier. I'd prepped for this for months. Every call, every draft, every late-night spreadsheet, that was all me. And now Darren, same age as me but with the emotional maturity of a paper cut, had decided he was taking the reins. "Why?" I asked, voice low, still in shock. He didn't flinch. "Because I'm sick of being outshined," he said, as if that explained everything. "Just because you speak French doesn't make you irreplaceable." That's when it hit me. He thought my ability to speak French was the only reason I was leading the deal. He didn't even know the client's preferred language was Zulu. And I didn't correct him. Let him walk off that cliff himself. I stood, straightened my blazer, and said it with zero hesitation. "Good luck tomorrow, Vice President. It's all yours." I left the conference room before the bile could reach my throat. Darren's smirk echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. An hour later, CEO Nolan, Darren's father, walked in expecting to see me. "Where's Lucas?" "I let him go," Darren said, smug. "You what?" And just like that I knew I'd won. Let me rewind for a second. I'm Lucas. I'm 42, and this would have been my fourth company. I always told people I left my previous jobs to pursue growth, but that was only half the truth. The reality? I was pushed out. Not because I failed, because I didn't. Because I made insecure men uncomfortable. I still remember my interview here like it was yesterday. Senior VP Malcolm, tall, careful, and smarter than he pretended to be, looked at my resume and said, 3 companies in a decade. You don't strike me as someone chasing promotions." I hesitated, then told him the truth. I outperformed the wrong people. That's why I left. He nodded, like he already knew. "Thanks for being honest," he said. "You'll hear from us." 3 days later, I was offered the role of regional sales manager, even though I applied for a department lead position. I panicked and called to clarify. "Is this a mistake?" Malcolm just chuckled. "The current manager retires next month. And I don't hire people to follow, I hire them to run the show." I took the job. The office was in Austin, Texas, nothing fancy, but clean, energized, modern. The staff skewed young, early 30s at most. I thought that might be an issue. It wasn't. If anything, my leadership style, open, adaptive, was what made me a hit with the team. But Darren? Darren hated it. The moment my predecessor left, Darren tried pulling rank. "Going forward," he said, "you run all reports through me first. I don't care what your title is." He wanted control. That was obvious. But when I asked, "Based on what directive?" he couldn't answer. He just doubled down. "You're new. You don't just drive without a license. I've managed regional exports for nearly 20 years. That was when I realized Darren didn't see a colleague, he saw a rival. Malcolm backed me up in front of the board. He even told them Darren had personally recommended me. CEO Nolan agreed and said, "Micromanaging a competent team member is just insecurity in a suit." Darren was humiliated. That's when the sabotage began. At first, it was small. A sample went missing. Flyers were sent to the wrong address. Procurement delayed a shipment by 4 days, then denied they got the order at all. Every single time, I traced it back to departments Darren had influence over. No one would say it aloud, but I saw the pattern. And then came the bombshell. 2 nights before our Cape Town negotiation, the hotel suddenly canceled our reservation. When I called, they said someone from our company had personally requested the cancellation. I didn't need to guess who. I stormed into Darren's office. He denied it, said it must have been my assistant. But the finance record? It traced back to Darren's team. I warned him. If this happens again, I'll bring it straight to Nolan. And I've got the recorded call to prove it. He backed off. But not for long. By the time I packed up my office that evening, I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. This wasn't the first time someone like Darren had tried to erase me just before a major win. But there was something different about this, something more deliberate. This wasn't just personal jealousy. It felt like a pattern. Like I'd stumbled into a company already infected by his rot. As I headed to the elevators, I ran into Malcolm. "You look like a man who just walked through a minefield," he said. "Not a minefield. Just one landmine named Darren," I replied. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Tell me." So I did. The sabotage. The samples. The cancelled hotel. And now, the forced emotion on the eve of the negotiation. I laid it all out, not with anger, but precision. He listened in silence, arms folded. Then he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "Darren's done it again," he said flatly. "Again?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened his laptop and typed something into a secure folder. Then he turned the screen toward me. "Recognize any of these names?" I did. At least 4. Talented department heads. All mid-30s to early 40s. All had left within the last 2 years, supposedly for personal reasons. "That's what we tell the board," Malcolm said. "But the truth is they were forced out, slowly, subtly, and surgically." "How?" I asked. "Same story," he said. "Sabotage proposals. Sudden performance reviews. Reassigned projects. Then the final blow, promotion blocked or outright termination. And you just watched this happen." "I tried," he said quietly. "But Darren has Nolan's blind trust. Ever since he came in 5 years ago, on the request of Nolan's ex-wife, he's had free rein. Nolan didn't want him here, but he caved. And now? He protects him like he's some legacy bet that'll eventually pay off." I stared at the screen. The list was longer than I expected. But the pattern was obvious. Every single one of them was in their prime. Experienced, respected, and made to vanish. So what? Darren's threatened by anyone remotely competent in his age bracket. He's built his entire persona around being the youngest voice in the room, Malcolm said. He knows that once someone his age or younger outperforms him, his smoke and mirrors game falls apart. I sat back, stunned. I remembered what he said during our confrontation. "You were getting arrogant just because you speak French." No. This wasn't about language. This was about existence. I wasn't just outperforming him, I was exposing him. "I've seen this before," I told Malcolm. 3 companies. 3 different cities. Every one of them collapsed because someone like Darren drove out all the talent. When there's no one left to challenge them, they don't rise, they rot. Malcolm's jaw tensed. "I believe you. Then do something about it," I said. "Because I'm not walking away this time." He looked at me, really looked at me, and nodded once. "Leave it with me. Just go home. Rest." I didn't. I went straight to HR. I wasn't there to argue or complain, I just asked for my resignation packet. The young HR rep looked panicked and called someone. 5 minutes later, Malcolm walked in and waved her away. "Just a formality," he said. "You won't be turning it in." The next morning, I stayed home. And just as I expected, chaos erupted. Darren had marched into the negotiation suite alone, expecting a photo op, a signature, and a handshake. Instead, he walked into a firestorm. The CEO of the South African firm, a towering man with a booming voice and zero tolerance for incompetence, had one question. "Where is the man who speaks Zulu?" Darren blinked. Then he panicked. Then he lied. And when the translators tried to bridge the gap and the deal began to crumble, Nolan's phone rang. Meanwhile, I was in my kitchen, drinking coffee in my sweatpants, when my phone buzzed. "Blocked number," I answered. "Lucas, it's Darren. You need to come. Right now." I didn't reply at first. We're about to lose the deal. I didn't realize, look, I didn't know the documents were in Zulu? I asked calmly. That detail was in the very first brief, Darren. I didn't mean to. You meant to fire me. What you didn't mean was to fail. He was quiet. I'm on leave, I said. But feel free to explain everything to Nolan. Or better yet, put him on speaker. I'd love to hear his thoughts. And that's when I knew I had the leverage. When I walked into the hotel conference room, 10 minutes late by design, Darren looked like someone who just watched the stock market crash in real time. The CEO of the South African firm, Mr. Sabiko, was seated with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable but ice-cold. I nodded at the receptionist, smoothed out my blazer, and entered the room with a smile. Sorry for the delay, I said in fluent Zulu. The shift in the air was instant. Mr. Sabiko's eyes widened slightly. He stood, extended his hand. Now we can begin. I didn't even glance at Darren. He was pale, sweating, mumbling something about translation support. But the damage had been done. I knew from experience that losing face in these negotiations wasn't just embarrassing, it was catastrophic. Reputation, once cracked in a market like this, never sealed back clean. In under 40 minutes, we closed the deal. Polite laughter, firm handshakes, a signature on the contract. Easy, if you actually knew what you were doing. After our guests left, I sat in the empty boardroom and exhaled, the weight of it all settling over me like a wet coat. It wasn't pride I felt. It was vindication laced with sadness. Because what should have been a celebration of team effort had been poisoned by one man's insecurity. Darren was slumped in a corner chair like a puppet with its strings cut. His father, Nolan, walked in moments later, looked at the signed contract, then at his son. What happened? Darren opened his mouth, then closed it. He fired me, I said calmly. Tried to handle it himself. Nolan stared at him like he didn't recognize him. I didn't know the contract was in Zulu, Darren muttered, voice barely above a whisper. You didn't know, Nolan repeated. It's on the cover page, Darren. The silence was brutal. Write your resignation, Nolan said flatly. Today. You can stay on payroll for a few weeks, but you're out. Darren didn't argue. He just nodded and left, defeated. That would have been satisfying enough. But I wasn't done. Back at the office, I met with Malcolm again. This time, in his executive suite with the blinds drawn. I need you to understand, I told him. This isn't just about Darren. He's not some rogue actor. This culture, the quiet targeting of competent people in their 30s and 40s, it's systemic. And it will happen again if nothing changes. Malcolm nodded. Then we need to change it. We sat for hours, poring over old resignation files, reviewing complaints that never made it past HR, comparing patterns. I shared what had happened at my past jobs. That all 3 companies I worked for had collapsed within 2 years of my departure. Not because of me, but because the people who pushed me out did the same thing to others. Eventually, they ran out of talent. And the company ran out of air. I pulled up the websites of those former employers. One now redirected to a 404-page. Another had been absorbed by a competitor. The third hadn't updated its homepage since 2021. You think this company's headed for the same fate? Malcolm asked. Not yet, I said. But we're on the edge. He took a deep breath. Then we do this together. In the following days, Malcolm and I worked quietly but decisively. Nolan was still stunned by Darren's collapse but agreed to let Malcolm initiate a review of department leads and investigate complaints that had been buried. Several supervisors who had rubber-stamped Darren's sabotage either resigned or were reassigned to low-impact roles. Some tried to fight back. But this time, there was documentation. Dates. Patterns. Proof. And then came the surprise twist I never saw coming. Nolan called me into his office. I owe you, he said simply. I was about to respond when he added, You'll be stepping in as executive vice president. Malcolm will take over as interim president. I'm moving to chairman. I blinked. You what? You saved this company from imploding, he said. Now I want you to help rebuild it. 3 days after Darren's quiet resignation, I was officially named executive vice president. No champagne. No announcement. Just an email from the board stamped with urgency and approval. That's how you know a company is bleeding. They promote the firefighter while the smoke's still curling under the door. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I went straight to HR. Not for protocol. For records. There was something that had been bothering me ever since I saw the internal list Malcolm showed me, the one with all the names of managers who chose to leave. I couldn't stop thinking about the way it mirrored my own pattern. The slow, suffocating sabotage. The isolation. The final shove. I needed to know how deep this went. The HR director, Marla, looked nervous when I asked for access. These files are sensitive, she said. And some of them are sealed. Unseal them, I said. I'm EVP now. I need to know what we're sitting on. She didn't argue. She knew the storm was coming too. It took me 6 hours, a thermos of cold coffee, and a room that smelled like dust and denial, but I found what I was looking for. A folder labeled Internal Exit Risk, Tier 2 Employees. Dated back 4 years. Marked confidential. The first page was a spreadsheet. Dozens of names. Departments. Performance scores. Notes like, too ambitious. Strong rapport with staff, potential influence risk. Close in age to Darren. Unlikely to follow informal leadership chain. Every single one of them had left within months of those notes being filed. My own name wasn't on the list. But the pattern was unmistakable. The company had been tracking people like me, mid-career, competent, and too self-assured to be manipulated. The minute you stood out, you got filed as a threat. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Tucked inside a scanned memo was a redacted email chain between Darren and someone in HR. Subject: Re Lucas D. Background file request. The email was from Reed Maxwell, a senior HR compliance officer. Darren had asked for my full employment history, language certifications, even psychological profile notes from my onboarding interviews. He'd used HR like his own personal surveillance unit. I leaned back in the chair, jaw clenched. I remembered Reed, polite, always smiling, the kind of guy who remembered everyone's birthday. I never would have suspected him. Which, I realized, is probably why Darren picked him. The final attachment? A message dated 2 weeks before the hotel sabotage. He won't be a problem after this quarter. We'll either reassign or bury him in compliance hell. So it had been a coordinated takedown. And it nearly worked. I brought the file to Malcolm the next morning. His face tightened as he read. Jesus Christ. He muttered. We trusted HR to manage people, not target them. Reed's still on payroll. I said. He needs to go. We can't just fire him overnight. Malcolm said. We need to document everything. Make it unshakable. We're not burying this. I snapped. If we let this slide, we're no better than Darren. Malcolm looked at me for a long time. Then nodded. You're right. Let's do it clean. That afternoon, we initiated an internal audit. Quiet, precise, and with legal oversight. Every email, every document, every whispered recommendation in those files was cataloged. We didn't send warnings. We didn't issue suspensions. We gathered proof. And while we waited for the audit to complete, I called Reed into my office. I know what you did, I said, voice like frost. He blinked, played dumb. I saw the files. I saw the emails. And I saw the way you helped Darren orchestrate the sabotage of anyone who made him feel inadequate. Silence. I want your resignation. Today. Or we go public. That's when he cracked. He told me it was just precaution. That you were unstable. That you'd tank the deal. I didn't flinch. I tanked nothing. But you? You compromised the entire department for a man who thought Zulu was a French dialect. He left without another word. The company's restructuring wasn't just about punishment, it was about prevention. The board greenlit my proposal to overhaul the entire leadership pipeline. We eliminated the silent age bias. We removed the backdoor whisper network that had quietly shaped promotions. We implemented anonymous feedback channels. We even brought back 2 former employees Darren had quietly ousted. And most importantly, we sent a message: competence would no longer be treated as a threat. A week after Reed's resignation, the HR audit was complete. The findings weren't just ugly, they were surgical. Every targeted reassignment, every ghosted promotion, every backdoor whisper between Darren and compliance had been documented down to the hour. Nolan called an emergency board meeting. He stood in front of a room full of men and women who once blindly nodded through Darren's decisions and held nothing back. This company was almost destroyed from the inside, he said, by people who couldn't stand working beside someone smarter than them. When he finished, he turned to me. Lucas, do what needs to be done. So I did. Every executive who signed off on those exit notes was placed under review. Several were removed. Others were quietly transitioned out with no golden parachutes. The rest, those who'd been silent bystanders, were required to undergo recertification and performance evaluations under new leadership. That leadership? Me and Malcolm. He was officially named president 2 weeks later. I remained executive vice president, but I wasn't just managing anymore, I was shaping the future hires. Every interview went through me. Not because I wanted control, but because I refused to let another Darren get in. The talent they tried to weed out? We called them back. We apologized. We hired people in their 30s and 40s who had been passed over for being too polished or too direct. We put them in real positions of influence, and guess what? Our revenue jumped 18% in 1 quarter. But the part no one saw coming was what I did next. You see, there's something I never told anyone at the company. Not even Malcolm. I speak 7 languages. I don't list them on my resume. I don't bring them up in meetings. Because every time I've led with that, I get put in a translator box, useful but invisible. Just a mouthpiece for men in suits who don't know how to negotiate with empathy or context. At my last job, I asked to be part of the deal team. My supervisor told me, interpreters don't need opinions. They need good posture and a smile. They called me a tool. So I left. At the next company, they used me to close deals in Tokyo and Brussels, then docked my bonus because I wasn't officially part of sales. So when I joined here, I kept my mouth shut. Until Darren tried to fire me over the one thing he didn't understand: language. And ironically, it was that skill he resented that saved the company. Malcolm found out weeks later. We were walking past the marketing floor when he saw me reviewing French ad copy. Wait, you read Arabic, French, Japanese, and… He trailed off. All of them, I said with a smile. Even Finnish. But don't worry, I won't put it on my business cards. He laughed. Why hide it? Because when I show it too soon, they try to use me. When I show it too late, they realize I'm the one they should have been listening to. He looked at me for a long second. Then it's time we let them listen. At our next quarterly meeting, Malcolm made an announcement. Lucas saved this company. Not with his title, but with his silence. He saw the cracks. He patched them before we collapsed. And now, he's going to train the people who replace us one day. He handed me the floor. I stood in front of 200 employees and said only this. If you've ever been sidelined, silenced, or underestimated, stay where you are. Learn everything. And the second they hand you the keys, build something better. That's what I did. That's what you will do. The applause was quiet at first. Then thunderous. Nolan kept his promise. He stepped back and let us lead. Malcolm as president. Me as EVP. We weren't perfect. But we were real. And as for Darren? Last I heard, He's been unemployed for 6 months. Every interview ends the same way. We appreciate your interest, but we're going in a different direction. He told someone on LinkedIn he was building a stealth startup. I couldn't help but laugh. The only thing stealthy about Darren was how quietly he tanked every team he touched. The rest of us? We moved on. We built